I used to think silence was comforting. The silence of a late-night room with the lamp still on, the silence of lying beside James and listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Silence meant safety, meant rest. But now, as the plane sliced through the night sky, silence was suffocating. It pressed against my ears like water filling a drowning lung, reminding me that the seat beside me was empty. James's absence was louder than any turbulence, more deafening than the engines roaring outside. 30 hours awake. My eyes felt coated with sand, my body reduced to a husk that simply moved forward because there was no other choice. I had buried my husband on foreign soil. I had pressed my lips to his coffin one last time while strangers carried him away. I had sat through condolences offered in a language not mine, accepted embraces from people who would return to their families while mine crumbled into dust. And then, alone, I boarded a flight home. Home. The word already tasted bitter in my mouth. I pressed my forehead to the tiny window, watching clouds shift below. They looked like a graveyard of ghosts, pale and shapeless. I thought about James's laugh, how it could roll across a room and chase shadows into corners. I tried to imagine hearing it again, tried to imagine him waiting at the arrival gate with that crooked grin, teasing me for crying. But my imagination betrayed me. What I saw instead was the cold hole in the earth swallowing him, and the weight of a folded flag they had placed in my arms. A cruel exchange, flesh for fabric. I pulled the blanket tighter, though my skin was already clammy with exhaustion. Around me, passengers dozed or scrolled through glowing screens. I envied their normality. None of them were returning from a battlefield of grief. None of them had to face a family who had already shown me, countless times, that my pain was inconvenient to them. Yet still, like a fool, I clung to hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they would remember that I was still their daughter, their sister, that I had just buried the man I loved. When the plane began its slow descent, I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't fear of flying, it was fear of landing. Fear of facing what waited or what didn't. My phone buzzed in my palm, reminding me of reality's cruelty. I opened the family group chat, the one filled with memes and birthday reminders and the shallow digital glue that was supposed to keep us connected. My hands trembled as I typed, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" A simple plea. Not even a request for comfort, just for presence, for a ride, for proof that I wasn't completely disposable. I stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots to appear. When they finally did, my heart lifted despite myself. My brother Troy was typing. He would come. He had to. He was my brother. We're busy. Try Uber. The words were so casual, so cutting in their indifference that at first I thought I had misread them. Busy, as if grief had a schedule that needed to accommodate his errands. Busy when my life had been torn in half. I reread the message, each letter hammering into my skull. Try Uber. That was the sum of my brother's care. Then my mother's bubble appeared. My chest ached with a fragile, desperate hope. She at least would understand. She at least would know what it meant to bury a husband, because she had buried my father years ago. She had known that darkness. She would not abandon me in it. Why didn't you plan better? No sympathy, no softness, just blame, sharpened into a knife and twisted. My vision blurred with hot tears. My mother, the woman who had taught me that family meant everything, now teaching me that family was only a word they used when it suited them. I waited for my sister Lily to reply. The dots appeared, then disappeared. Appear, disappear, and then nothing. Her silence screamed louder than any words. The plane jolted as it touched down, wheels screeching against the runway. Around me, passengers clapped softly, relieved to be home. Home. I felt like a ghost drifting into a place that no longer had space for me. I wanted to scream, to smash the phone against the tray table, but I couldn't move. My hands were frozen, gripping the device as though it were a lifeline, even as it severed what little lifeline I had left. I remembered birthdays where I had driven hours to deliver cakes, holidays where I had canceled trips just to sit at their table, the countless sacrifices I had made to prove I belonged. And now, when I needed the smallest gesture in return, I was met with dismissal, reproach, silence. My chest hollowed. My family wasn't simply absent, they were actively pushing me into the abyss. As passengers rose to collect their luggage, I stayed seated. My body felt leaden. What was the point of rushing to baggage claim when no one was waiting on the other side? The thought of dragging my suitcase through the crowd, alone, after everything, I nearly collapsed under the weight of it. My throat burned as though a scream had lodged there and refused to come out. I pressed the phone against my lips, my tears wetting the screen. James would have come for me. James would have sprinted through the terminal, flowers in hand, making a scene just to make me laugh. James would never have let me feel unwanted. But James was under the earth, and all I had left was a family too busy to care. I wanted to believe it was grief making me paranoid, exaggerating their coldness. But the truth was sharper than denial. They had always been like this. Today just tore away the veil. The flight attendants gave me pitying looks as I finally stood. I must have looked pitiful, red-eyed, shoulders slumped, dragging a bag like a prisoner chained to her grief. I muttered thanks and stumbled into the stream of passengers. The terminal was bright, too bright, a cruel fluorescence that exposed every crack in me. Families reunited with laughter and hugs around me. Lovers kissed, children squealed. And I alone walked past it all like an intruder in someone else's happiness. Outside the sliding doors, the air was thick with car exhaust and the restless hum of life. I checked the chat again, foolishly, as if maybe they had changed their minds. But no, the words were still there, etched like scars. Try Uber. Why didn't you plan better? And silence, always silence. I felt something inside me shift, subtle but irreversible, a fracture spreading. My grief was not enough for them. My loss did not move them. If I was drowning, they would watch from the shore, arms crossed, waiting to see if I floated or sank. And maybe they would prefer if I sank. One less burden. I raised my hand to hail a taxi, my fingers trembling. The driver barely glanced at me as he loaded my suitcase, his indifference a mirror of my family's. As the car pulled away, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched the city smear into a blur of neon and shadow. I had never felt smaller, never felt more unwanted. And yet, within the pain, a spark of something darker flickered. A whisper that told me, remember this. Remember how they abandoned you. Because grief can hollow you, but it can also sharpen you. The city lights blurred into rivers of gold and white as the taxi sped through the evening traffic. I leaned my head against the glass and closed my eyes, wishing I could vanish into the vibrations of the road. Every turn, every stoplight, felt like a reminder that I was returning not to comfort, but to absence. The seat beside me remained empty, just as it had on the plane. I reached for it instinctively, searching for James's hand, but my fingers found only air. I clenched them into a fist until my nails bit into my palm. The driver asked for the address, and I gave it in a voice that cracked. He nodded, indifferent. That indifference was easier to bear than the cruelty of my family. Strangers owed me nothing, but blood was supposed to mean something. Tonight I learned that blood meant very little. My apartment greeted me with silence, a silence that was no longer comforting but cavernous. The moment the door shut behind me, the weight of the day collapsed onto my shoulders. I sank to the floor, suitcase still unopened, phone clenched in my hand. The words from the chat glowed on the screen as if mocking me. Busy. Plan better. Silence. I laughed, a jagged sound that startled even me. It sounded like a sob disguised as laughter, or maybe laughter disguised as a sob. I was not sure anymore. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. I wanted James. I wanted him so desperately that my body ached with the craving. But grief does not return the dead. It only sharpens the void they leave behind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless. At some point, I dragged myself up and into the bedroom. The bed was still unmade from the morning I had rushed to the airport, sheets twisted in the shape of the man who would never lie in them again. I crawled into his side and breathed in the fading scent of him on the pillow. My tears soaked the fabric until it was cold against my skin. Sleep came like a storm. Violent, broken, filled with dreams that tore me apart. I saw James reaching for me at the airport, smiling, alive. I ran toward him, calling his name, but every step I took pushed him farther away. My family stood between us, arms folded, faces blank. I begged them to move, but they shook their heads. When I finally pushed past, James was gone, the ground yawning open where he had stood. I woke up gasping, throat raw, heart pounding. The room was still dark. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for some sign that maybe someone had changed their mind. But no. The screen lit up with the same cold indifference. The group chat had moved on to other topics, a funny video, a shared recipe, the everyday chatter of people who had no space for my pain. My message was already buried. My loss was already forgotten. I curled tighter into the sheets. I thought about all the times I had been there for them. When Troy had broken his leg, I had driven 3 hours in the middle of the night to bring him to the hospital. When Lily had failed an exam, I had stayed up until dawn tutoring her, even though I had a shift at work the next morning. When my mother had cried after losing her job, I had paid her rent, even though it meant skipping meals. I had given and given as if generosity would earn me love, but love never came. Only expectation, only criticism, only silence when I needed something in return. The grief in me turned sour, fermenting into something heavier. I wanted to believe they were simply careless, distracted, unaware. But no, their words were deliberate. They chose not to come. They chose to blame. They chose to stay silent. That choice revealed a truth I had avoided for years. My family did not see me as a person worth holding. I was convenient when I gave, disposable when I needed. I rose from bed and walked through the apartment, trailing my fingers along the walls as though they could steady me. The rooms were filled with memories of James. The kitchen where he would hum while cooking, the couch where he would pull me into his arms, the bookshelf he had built for me one winter. Every corner whispered his name. And now, those whispers became knives. I collapsed onto the couch and buried my face in my hands. My sobs echoed in the empty room. I wished the walls could absorb them, wished the floor could swallow me whole. But the crying only made the silence afterward more unbearable. It was in that silence that I heard the truth most clearly. I was alone. Not just alone in this room, but alone in the world. Something in me hardened. My grief was vast, but it was no longer only grief. It was a revelation. I could not count on my family. I could not lean on them for comfort. If I drowned, they would let me. If I begged, they would sneer. If I died, they would gossip over the inconvenience of my funeral arrangements. I stood and went to the mirror. My reflection startled me. My eyes were swollen, my skin pale, my hair tangled. I looked like a ghost, a woman half buried. I touched the glass as though I might reach through and pull that ghost back into life. "I am still here," I whispered. The words trembled, but they were mine. "I am still here." The whisper grew into a vow. They would not break me. Not with silence, not with cruelty, not with betrayal. They had shown me who they were. Now I will remember. Now I will learn. I returned to bed as dawn began to bleed through the curtains. The sky outside shifted from black to bruised purple, then to gray. I lay awake, watching the light creep across the ceiling. My chest still ached, my body still trembled, but beneath the grief, a seed of something else had been planted. It was not hope. Hope was fragile, and I could no longer afford fragility. No, what took root was darker. A seed of defiance, small and quiet, waiting to grow. The day had not yet begun, and already I knew. My family had abandoned me when I was most broken. They had carved that abandonment into my bones, and I will never forget. The morning after felt like a punishment. Pale light crawled across the ceiling, dragging me into another day I did not want to face. My body ached with exhaustion, yet sleep had done nothing to heal me. It was as if grief had sunk its claws into my chest and refused to let go. I lay still, listening to the emptiness of the apartment, and realized that silence had become my new companion. Not the tender silence of James's breathing, but the hollow kind, the one that screamed of absence. I reached for my phone. Some part of me still hoped that during the night, one of them might have softened, might have remembered me. But the group chat was silent. My message sat there like a stone at the bottom of a river, covered now by casual ripples of conversation between them. A picture of Troy's new car, a recipe my mother wanted to try, a silly meme from Lily. They had moved on, and I was still stuck in the wreckage. Their indifference gnawed at me, not just because of what it meant now, but because it confirmed something I had spent years trying to bury. This was not new. It had always been this way. I closed my eyes and let the memories bleed in. I was 6 years old, standing in the living room in a too-big dress, clutching a drawing I had made in school. My brother Troy, older by 5 years, was showing off his trophy from a soccer match. Everyone clapped, voices rising with pride, my father's booming laugh filling the room. When I tried to hold up my drawing, my mother glanced at it, smiled faintly, and then turned back to Troy. "Not now, Clara," she said. "Let your brother have his moment." Her words carved themselves into me. Not now, not important. That was the rhythm of my childhood. Troy excelled, and the world bent to his shine. Lily, the youngest, was delicate and adored, her every stumble met with coddling. And me, I was the middle ground, the shadow in between, too quiet to demand, too responsible to be fussed over. My achievements were footnotes, my failures magnified. I remembered birthdays where my presents were practical things, school supplies, sweaters, while Troy received gadgets and Lily dolls with glossy hair. I remembered Christmas mornings when my smile felt forced, because even as I unwrapped a book I had secretly wanted, I could see in my parents' eyes that their joy belonged to the others. It is a cruel thing to grow up knowing you are loved less. The realization does not strike like lightning. It seeps, drop by drop, until it fills every corner of you. By the time I was a teenager, I had stopped expecting anything different. I played the role they gave me, the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who would not make trouble. If I tried to rebel, my mother's voice would cut me down. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" she would ask. Or worse, We already have one Lily to worry about, don't become another. Still, I tried. God, how I tried. I brought home good grades, hoping they would notice. I offered to help in the kitchen, hoping they would thank me. I smiled through hurt, hoping they would love me more. But love was rationed in our house, and I was always at the back of the line. The apartment around me blurred as tears welled up again. Lying there, I realized that the sting of their recent betrayal was sharper because it was not betrayal at all. It was continuity. They had always chosen themselves over me. Last night was simply the latest example, too blatant to ignore. I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around me. The ache in my chest throbbed with every heartbeat. My mind drifted to the summer I turned 15. I had fallen from my bike, scraping my knee badly enough that blood streaked down my shin. I limped home, crying, hoping for comfort. My mother took one look at me and sighed. "Why weren't you paying attention? Honestly, Clara, you're too old to be this careless." She handed me a towel and returned to her chores. I bandaged myself, tears mixing with the sting of antiseptic. The lesson was clear. Pain was mine to handle alone. When my father died years later, I thought maybe things would change. I thought grief might soften them, draw us closer. But even then, I remember sitting at the funeral, my hands cold in my lap, while my mother clung to Troy and Lily as though I did not exist. People came to offer condolences, and she introduced them to her wonderful son and her sweet daughter. There was background noise, a blurred figure in family photos. I swallowed hard, pulling myself back into the present. James had seen it. He had known. He used to tell me that I deserved better, that blood ties meant nothing without love to bind them. He would cup my face in his hands and say, "Clara, you are not invisible, not to me." With him, I believed it. With him, I felt seen. And now he was gone, and I was left staring once again into the cold eyes of a family who had never truly wanted me. The clock ticked on the wall, each second loud in the silence. I stood, restless, and wandered into the kitchen. The fridge hummed, half empty, neglected from the weeks I had spent abroad with James before his death. I pulled out a bottle of water and gripped it tight, grounding myself in the chill of the glass. My hands trembled, and I realized I was still waiting for something, still waiting for them to call, to apologize, to say they cared. But the phone remained dark. I leaned against the counter and thought about all the years I had spent twisting myself into knots for them. The endless sacrifices, the swallowed words, the desperate search for approval that never came. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "Why didn't you plan better?" She had not asked how I was, had not offered comfort, had not even pretended to care. Her first instinct had been to blame. It always has been. My chest tightened as I thought about Lily. She had always been the darling, the fragile one. I had shielded her from our mother's temper, had defended her when Troy mocked her, had given her money when she was broke in college. I thought she would answer me if no one else did, but her silence was worse than cruelty. Her silence told me she had chosen to look away. The hurt layered itself like sediment in my soul, building, compacting, hardening. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shatter the kitchen into pieces just to release the pressure inside me. But I did not move. I simply stood there, clutching the bottle, breathing through the storm. The truth was unbearable yet undeniable. My family had never been my refuge. They were the storm I had learned to survive. I carried the bottle of water to the living room and sank into the couch. The cushions sagged beneath me, a reminder of evenings when James and I curled there together, watching films or talking until our laughter drowned out the world. Now it was just me, a woman pressed into fabric that still carried his ghost. I stared at the ceiling until it blurred, and then the memories dragged me under again. There was a winter when I was 12, snow piling against the windows, the house heavy with the smell of pine and roast. Troy had been accepted into some advanced program, and my parents could not stop beaming. He sat at the head of the table like a king, retelling his triumphs, his voice loud, their applause louder. When it was my turn to share, I mentioned that I had won a writing contest at school. My teacher had praised my story, said I had talent. But the room grew quiet, not with admiration, but with dismissal. My father chuckled and said, "That's nice, Clara, but writing won't put food on the table." My mother nodded, already turning back to Troy. That night, I tore the certificate into pieces before hiding them at the bottom of the trash. I told myself it did not matter, but I still feel the sting of that moment like frostbite. The pattern continued through the years. If I spoke, I was ignored. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I succeeded, it was brushed aside. My existence was tolerated, not celebrated. That kind of erosion does not break you all at once. It wears you down slowly, grain by grain, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you have been sanded into something smaller than you ever intended to be. James was the first person who saw me as whole. He used to ask about my stories, used to beg me to read them aloud. He told me that words were power, that my voice mattered. And with him, I started to believe it. But now he was gone, and the echoes of my family's contempt returned louder than ever. The betrayal of yesterday, Troy's curt dismissal, my mother's cold reproach, Lily's silence, was not an isolated cruelty. It was the culmination of every wound they had carved into me. The scars lined up neatly, forming a map that led me to this very moment, sitting alone, clutching a bottle of water like it could keep me from drowning. I rose and paced the apartment, restless. My mind would not stop replaying. Troy sneering when I asked for help with math homework, calling me stupid. My mother sighing whenever I wanted attention, as if my needs were interruptions. Lily borrowing clothes and never returning them, then sulking when I confronted her. Each memory sharpened until it drew blood. I stopped at the bookshelf James had built. My gaze traced the wood, each shelf smooth beneath my fingers. The books stood like silent witnesses, lined up in order. Among them were notebooks, my old journals filled with stories and fragments of myself. I pulled one out, opened to a random page, and read words written by a girl desperate to be loved. I wonder if they would miss me if I was gone. Maybe then they would see me. The handwriting was younger, rounder, but the ache was the same. I slammed the notebook shut, my throat tight. The truth was unbearable. Even then, even as a child, I had known. I had always known. I dropped the notebook back on the shelf and wrapped my arms around myself. I wanted to scream, to call them, to demand why. Why was I never enough? Why did they refuse to see me? But I already knew the answer. Their blindness was not accidental. It was chosen, and nothing I could say would force their eyes open. The clock ticked. Outside, the world carried on. I imagined Troy at work, my mother chatting with neighbors, Lily scrolling through her phone. They were living as though nothing had happened, as though I had not buried my husband, as though I had not begged them for the smallest act of kindness. My grief did not inconvenience them because they had never allowed it to touch them at all. I sank back onto the couch and curled into myself. My tears had run dry, leaving behind only a hollow ache. I thought of James again, how he had always pulled me close when I doubted myself. He used to whisper, "You are not invisible, Clara. You never were." But now his voice was gone, and mine was all I had left. I whispered into the room, "They never loved me." The words tasted bitter, but they were true. And truth, however painful, is a kind of liberation. I said it again, louder. "They never loved me." The walls absorbed it, the air thick with the weight of my confession. A strange calm settled over me, not comfort but clarity. For years I had chased their approval, twisted myself to fit their expectations, swallowed my pain for the chance of being seen. But last night, their cruelty stripped away the illusion. I no longer had to wonder. I no longer had to hope. My family was not a refuge. They never had been. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Grief still clawed at me, but beneath it, something darker stirred. Not anger yet, not revenge, but the seed of defiance that had taken root last night. It pulsed quietly, a reminder that though I was broken, I was not finished. The past was clear now. The present was unbearable, but the future would be mine to shape. The days that followed blurred together, a haze of grief and sleepless nights. I drifted from room to room like a shadow, unable to escape the weight of James's absence. Every object reminded me of him, his shoes by the door, his jacket draped over a chair, the book on the nightstand that he had been halfway through. The apartment felt like a mausoleum, filled with relics of a life torn abruptly in half. I thought I could not hurt more than I already did. But grief, I was learning, was a bottomless well. Every time I believed I had touched the ground, the earth crumbled beneath me and I fell further still. And my family's silence made the fall all the more brutal. 3 days after my return, the phone finally rang. My chest tightened when I saw my mother's name flash across the screen. For a moment I hesitated, thumb hovering, afraid to answer. Yet some small, desperate part of me longed for reconciliation, for comfort, for anything that resembled love. I pressed accept. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. "Clara, how are you managing?" The question was so casual it nearly broke me. How was I managing? I had buried my husband, flown home alone, begged them for help, and been denied. I wanted to scream, to ask where she had been when I stood in that airport alone, when I sat on the bathroom floor shaking with grief. Instead, I swallowed the fury burning my throat and whispered, "I'm trying." She sighed, the sound clipped and impatient. "Good, you're strong, Clara, you always have been." It was not praise. It was dismissal, as it had always been. If I was strong, then she owed me nothing. If I was strong, then my suffering could be ignored. Then her tone shifted, a subtle eagerness threading her words. Listen, I wanted to discuss something. About James's affairs, the estate, the assets, it's all very complicated, isn't it? My heart lurched. The wound was still bleeding, and she was already circling it like a vulture. It's too soon, I said softly. Nonsense. These things must be addressed quickly. Otherwise, money gets tied up, opportunities are missed. Opportunities. That word clanged in my skull like a warning bell. This was not about me, not about James. This was about her. I gripped the phone tighter. James's affairs are mine to handle. I'm his wife. A pause, then a smile in her voice that chilled me. Of course, dear, but families help each other. You can't manage everything alone. I ended the call before I said something I would regret. My hand shook as I set the phone down, my breath shallow. Even now, even in my devastation, her mind turned not to my pain, but to what could be gained. I wanted to believe it was paranoia, grief twisting my perception, but unease lodged in my gut, heavy and undeniable. 2 days later, the unease solidified into proof. I had gone to the lawyer's office to sign preliminary documents. James had left me everything, of course. He had trusted me, loved me, made sure I would be secure. The lawyer was kind, speaking in hushed tones, guiding me through the labyrinth of paperwork. But as I left, I caught sight of a familiar figure in the lobby. Troy. He was leaning against the desk, speaking with the receptionist, his voice low but confident. My brother, who had not picked me up at the airport, who had not once asked how I was holding up, was here in the office where James's estate was being settled. I froze, blood roaring in my ears. He saw me and his smile faltered. Clara, he said, surprised, almost guilty. What are you doing here? My voice was thin, stretched taut by disbelief. He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Just asking some questions. You know, making sure things are handled properly. Handled properly, I repeated, the word sour. It isn't your business. His jaw tightened. We're family. Of course it's my business. Family, that word again, used like a weapon. He had ignored me when I needed him most, yet now he cloaked himself in the mantle of family to justify intrusion. I turned and walked out before my rage spilled over, but inside me something cracked further. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the thrum of my pulse. Images flashed through my mind. My mother's eager tone, Troy's guilty smile. A pattern was forming, one I could not ignore. They were circling me, circling James's memory like scavengers scenting blood. The final blow came a week later. I was sorting through James's documents when the doorbell rang. Lily stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with a feigned innocence I knew too well. She embraced me briefly, murmuring, "I'm so sorry," though her arms were limp around me. She sat on the couch, fidgeting, avoiding my eyes. Finally, she said, "Mom wanted me to give you this." She handed me a folder. Inside were papers, legal documents, neatly prepared, transferring certain rights of James's estate into my mother's name. My vision blurred. "What is this?" I whispered. Lily bit her lip, refusing to meet my gaze. "It's just practical. Mom said it would make things easier." She already signed. The betrayal struck harder than any blow. My own sister, the one I had defended, protected, loved, she had signed away what was not hers to give. She had chosen them over me, chosen greed over loyalty. I dropped the folder to the floor. The papers scattered like ashes. I stared at Lily, my voice trembling with fury and heartbreak. "How could you?" She flinched but did not answer. Her silence said enough. I turned away, unable to look at her. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the stench of betrayal. My chest burned, not only with grief but with a rising, searing anger. They had abandoned me in my darkest hour. Now they sought to strip from me the last gift James had left, the security he had ensured with love and foresight. They had revealed themselves fully, not family, but predators. And in that moment, as I gathered the scattered papers with shaking hands, I understood. My grief was no longer just about loss. It was about betrayal, about survival, about the war they had declared without speaking. They wanted to take everything from me. I would not let them. Lily left soon after, her excuses mumbled, her eyes darting to the door as if she could not escape quickly enough. When the door finally shut behind her, silence filled the apartment again, heavy and poisonous. I stood in the middle of the living room, the folder at my feet, the papers scattered like broken promises. My hands shook as I bent to gather them, each sheet of paper a knife against my skin. I pressed the stack to my chest and closed my eyes. James's name was printed on every page, but his voice, his protection, his love were absent. All that remained was ink on paper, now tainted by my family's greed. I sank onto the couch, staring at the mess in my lap. For years I had believed betrayal would come from strangers, from the outside world. but it had always been closest to home. They had abandoned me when I was a child, ignored me when I was a teenager, dismissed me when I was an adult. And now, when the man who had loved me most was gone, they descended like vultures to feast on what he left behind. Tears blurred my vision, but they were not the same tears I had shed at James's funeral. These were heavier, hotter, forged from anger rather than grief. My heart was breaking, but beneath the cracks something harder was forming. I whispered into the empty room, "You will not take him from me." The words steadied me. Saying them aloud transformed them into a vow. They had already stolen so much. My childhood, my sense of belonging, my fragile hope that they might one day love me. But they would not take James. Not the life we built together, not the legacy he had left in my hands. The days that followed were a blur of strategy and suspicion. I called the lawyer, confirming every detail, guarding every document like treasure. I changed passwords, secured accounts, locked away files. My grief remained, raw and unhealed, but I forced my trembling hands to steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. And still they came. Troy showed up one evening without calling, his cologne thick, his smile rehearsed. "I just wanted to check on you, sis," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. His eyes drifted around the apartment, not with concern but with calculation. I stood stiffly, arms folded. "I don't need you here," he chuckled as though I were being dramatic. "Come on, Clara, we're family, we should be helping each other." The word help tasted like ash on my tongue. "You mean you should be helping yourselves?" His grin faltered, but only for a moment. "Look, managing money, investments, properties, it's complicated. You're grieving. You can't possibly handle all this alone." I stepped closer, my voice low and sharp. "I buried my husband alone. I landed in this city alone. I've endured every silence, every cruelty, every dismissal from you. Don't you dare tell me what I can or cannot handle." His jaw tightened, anger flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing, only gave a tight nod before muttering, "Fine, but don't come crying when you mess it up." Then he left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The echo of it reverberated through me. He had not come to comfort me, he had come to measure what he could take. A few days later, my mother called again. Her voice was sweet, too sweet, dripping with false concern. "Clara, you know I only want what's best for you. Handling money is stressful, dear. I can take some of that burden. It's not fair for you to carry everything." My stomach turned. Her words, wrapped in false tenderness, were daggers beneath velvet. I answered coldly, "The burden is mine. James trusted me. He didn't trust you." The silence on the line was sharp, her breath catching for just a moment before she hissed, "Don't be ungrateful." "After all I've done for you?" I laughed bitterly, cutting her off. "What have you ever done for me, Mother? Besides reminding me every day that I was not enough?" The silence stretched, then she hung up. I lowered the phone slowly, my hands steady for the first time in days. The clarity was brutal but liberating. They did not love me. They never had. And now they no longer pretended to. That night, I sat at James's desk and opened one of my journals. I began to write, not stories, not fiction, but truth. I wrote down every wound, every betrayal, every silence that had shaped me. The page filled quickly, my hand cramping, tears blurring the ink. But I kept going, pouring the poison out of me onto paper, tracing the map of my pain so I would never forget. When I finally stopped, the sky outside had begun to light. I looked down at the words, messy and raw, and felt something shift inside me. Grief still crushed me, betrayal still burned, but I was no longer a child begging for love. I was a woman who had seen the truth. And the truth was this: they were not my refuge, they were my enemy. I closed the journal and placed my hand over it like a seal. "You will not take me," I whispered. "You will not take James, you will not take what's mine." The room was silent, but I felt the vow settle in my bones, heavy and unshakable. For the first time since James's death, I did not feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was standing on the shore, watching the tide. And though the storm raged, I knew I would not let it sweep me away. Not this time, not ever again. The days that followed were quieter on the surface, but I had learned not to trust quiet. Silence could be comforting when James was here, the kind of silence that wrapped around us after long conversations, when words were no longer needed. But now, silence felt sharp-edged, a pause before something cruel. My phone buzzed less often, yet when it did, it was never for comfort. My mother would call with questions disguised as concern. "Have you spoken to the bank yet, Clara? These things are time-sensitive." Or, "I know a man who can help manage investments. Perhaps you should meet him." Her voice dripped with false sweetness, but beneath it I heard the steel of calculation. Troy sent messages too, casual on the surface, but with a hunger I could almost smell. "How are you holding up, sis? By the way, do you know if James had stocks in the Henderson Company? Just curious." Or, let me know if you need help sorting through accounts. I have some experience, you know. And Lily was the hardest to read. She still texted occasionally, sending little hearts or asking if I had eaten, but her words rang hollow. I could see the hesitation in her phrasing, the way she avoided mentioning the folder she had delivered, the way her sentences trailed off like unfinished confessions. I began to pay attention. To every word, every glance, every silence. If they thought my grief made me weak, they were wrong. It made me raw, yes, but rawness sharpens as easily as it shatters. One evening, unable to sleep, I scrolled through my phone and found something that made my stomach twist. An email, weeks old, buried in a chain of correspondence between James and his lawyer. It wasn't meant for me, it had been forwarded accidentally before James passed. My mother's name was there. So was Troy. They had asked questions about inheritance laws, about spousal rights versus family rights. The timestamp was before James's accident. My hands trembled as I read it again and again. They had been circling even before the grave was dug. I closed my eyes and saw their faces, masks of sympathy at the funeral, words of comfort delivered with rehearsed tones. But the truth was here, in black and white. Their sympathy was an act, their grief a performance. They had already begun preparing to strip me of everything before James's body was even cold. I set the phone down and gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to scream, to smash the screen, to call them and demand why. But I didn't. Not yet. Their masks were cracking, but I would let them fall on their own. I would watch, I would listen, and I would remember every lie. The next day I visited the grocery store. The air outside was sharp with winter, and the streets were slick with frost. Inside the store, everything looked ordinary: families shopping, children whining, cashiers scanning items with mechanical precision. Yet I felt like an intruder in a world that no longer fit me. Every smile I saw looked false, every laugh a cover. Grief had rewired my vision, now I saw masks everywhere. As I loaded groceries into my cart, I spotted Lily at the far end of the aisle. She hadn't seen me. She was speaking on the phone, her face tense, her voice hushed but urgent. I moved closer, silent, pretending to browse the shelves. Yes, I gave it to her, she was saying, but she didn't sign, she wouldn't even look at it. A pause, her lips pressed thin. No, she won't. Not unless we force her. Mom, I'm trying, but she's stubborn. The words hit me like ice water. She wasn't talking to a friend. She was talking to my mother. My vision tunneled, the edges of the store blurring. Lily ended the call, sighing heavily before slipping her phone into her bag. When she turned and spotted me, she startled, her face arranging itself into a smile too quick, too bright. Clara, I didn't know you were here. I forced my lips into a tight smile. Neither did I, her cheeks flushed, and she busied herself with the shelves. How are you holding up? The question sounded rehearsed empty. I wanted to confront her right there, demand the truth. But instead I only said, I'm fine. My voice was flat, final. We parted quickly, but the encounter left me shaking. My sister, my blood, the girl I had once protected from cruel words and sharp corners, was working against me, conspiring behind my back. Her mask had slipped, and behind it I saw betrayal plain as day. That night I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the lamp on James's desk. I turned the memory of Lily's phone call over and over in my mind. Every piece fits too well. My mother's eagerness, Troy's sudden interest, Lily's silence. It was not clumsiness or coincidence. It was a scheme, and I was the obstacle. I opened my journal again, my pen scratching furiously. They will not stop. They will come at me with smiles, with lies, with documents already signed. They want what James left me. They want to strip me bare. The page filled quickly, my words jagged, slanting across the lines. I paused, my breath ragged, and pressed the pen to the paper harder than necessary, ink pooling into a dark blot. For years, I had begged for love. For years, I had excused their cruelty, convinced myself that if I gave enough, they would finally see me. But love had never been their intention. Control was, the advantage was, and now inheritance was. The masks were slipping. Soon they would be gone entirely. And when they were, I would no longer be the girl begging at the table. I would be something else. Something they had made me. The air in the apartment grew heavier with each passing day, as though the walls themselves were aware of the deceit circling me. Every knock at the door, every ring of the phone, set my nerves on edge. I no longer expected kindness. I expected a performance. Masks slipping, masks reforming, smiles stretched tight over teeth sharpened with greed. It happened again a week later. My mother asked to visit. Her tone was warm, almost pleading, as though she wanted to reconnect, to comfort. A part of me longed to refuse, to shut her out the way she had always shut me out. But another part, darker, colder, wanted to see her mask up close, to study the cracks in it. So I agreed. She arrived in a heavy coat, her perfume strong enough to suffocate the room. She embraced me briefly, her arms stiff, her cheek cold against mine. Then she looked around the apartment, her eyes scanning, cataloging. "It's a lovely place," she murmured. James had good taste. Had, the word carved through me like a knife. She said it with no tremor, no grief, just acknowledgement of possession. We sat. She accepted tea but barely touched it. She asked the usual empty questions about my health, my sleep, my eating. I answered politely, waiting. And then, as I knew she would, she leaned forward, her eyes sharp despite the softness of her smile. "Clara, dear, I've been thinking, it isn't right for you to carry all of this alone. Handling estates, assets, properties, it's overwhelming, isn't it? I don't want you to make mistakes in your grief. If you let me manage some of it, just temporarily, I can protect you from trouble." Her words were honeyed poison. Protect me. What she meant was to strip me. What she meant was control. I stared at her, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I'm managing. James trusted me with everything. He trusted me because he knew I could handle it. Her smile did not falter, but her eyes hardened. "He didn't know what state you'd be in when he left, Clara. He couldn't have predicted this. You're fragile now. That's nothing to be ashamed of." Fragile. The word struck me like a slap. I thought of all the years she had called me weak, dramatic, difficult. And now, in my deepest grief, she wielded the same accusation, not to comfort but to pry the ground out from under me. I leaned forward, my voice steady, quiet but sharp as glass. "I buried my husband. Alone. I signed the papers, I handled the lawyers, I sorted his belongings with my own hands. Do not call me fragile. Not now, not ever again." For a moment, her mask cracked. I saw the cold calculation flash in her eyes, the irritation that I had not bowed to her script. But then it was gone, replaced with a sigh and a feigned sadness. "I only want to help you, Clara. You'll see that someday." When she left, I stood at the window and watched her walk away, her figure stiff, her head high. She did not look back. She never had. Later that week, Troy called. His voice was casual, even jovial, as though nothing heavy lingered between us. "Sis, I've been looking into some investment opportunities. Thought maybe we could partner, grow what James left you." I laughed bitterly into the phone. "What he left me, not us, me?" There was a pause, then his voice hardened. "You don't need to be selfish, Clara. Family shares. Family shares." I almost dropped the phone from the sheer audacity of it. Where had my family been when I stood in the airport, suitcase heavy with grief? Where had my family been when I cried alone in a hotel room after James's death? Where had my family been when I begged for help and silence answered me? My voice shook, not with fear but with rage. "You don't get to say that word to me. You forfeited it." He cursed it under his breath before hanging up. Piece by piece, the mask slipped away. Their visits, their calls, their texts, they all followed the same script. Smiles stretched thin, voices lined with false sweetness, concern that melted into demands. They no longer even tried to hide their hunger. They circled me like predators, waiting for the moment they thought I might stumble. But I did not stumble. The grief still tore at me. Nights were long, filled with whispers of James's voice, with dreams that shattered into emptiness when I woke. But beneath the grief, something else grew, steady and unyielding. A spine of steel forged from betrayal. A resolve carved from loss. One evening I sat with James's journals. He had kept them, though few knew. Notes about investments, about his wishes, about our life together. I ran my fingers over his handwriting, tears streaking my cheeks. He had left everything in my hands because he trusted me, because he knew I was stronger than I believed. And in that moment, I vowed to honor that trust. I whispered into the quiet, "They won't take you from me. They won't take what you gave me." The vow settled deep in my bones. When I closed the journal, I felt the shift fully. The masks had fallen. The performances were over. I saw them now for what they were, not family, but adversaries. And I was no longer a desperate daughter begging for scraps of love. I was a widow standing on the edge of war. Grief is supposed to soften with time, or so people say. They promise that the edges dull, that the weight lifts, that one morning you wake and the world feels livable again. But for me, the opposite was true. The longer James was gone, the heavier the silence became, and the sharper the edges of my pain. Every day was a reminder that he was not coming back, that the warmth he carried into every room had vanished forever. At first, I had thought the silence was my prison. But slowly, I realized it was also a mirror. In the quiet, the truth became unavoidable. My family had never been my refuge. There had been a storm waiting for my weakest moment. And now, in the wake of James's death, they had found it. The phone calls, the visits, the thinly veiled demands, all of it had been piling on me like stones, pressing down, suffocating. For weeks, I tried to bear it, swallowing my anger, telling myself that confrontation would only make it worse. But something inside me began to change. The tears dried, the trembling eased, and in their place, a low fire started to burn. It was not a clean fire. It was blackened with grief, choked with smoke. But it burned all the same, and the more they circled me, the more it spread. One afternoon, I returned from the lawyer's office with a new stack of documents tucked under my arm. The winter wind stung my cheeks, and my fingers ached from clutching the folder too tightly. As I stepped into the apartment, I froze. The air felt wrong. The faint smell of perfume, my mother's perfume, lingered in the hallway. I dropped the groceries on the counter and walked into the living room. A drawer in James's desk stood slightly ajar. Papers that I had left neatly stacked were shuffled, edges misaligned. My chest tightened. I had locked the door when I left. Only one other person had a key, my mother. I stood in the middle of the room, fists clenched, the folder slipping from my grasp. The realization was like ice in my veins. They had not only begged and demanded, they had broken into my sanctuary. My grief had been invaded, my home trespassed. When the phone rang, I already knew who it would be. I snatched it up and hissed, "How long were you here?" A pause, then her voice smooth as silk. "Clara, dear, I don't know what you mean." My throat ached from holding back the scream that clawed at it. "Don't lie to me. The drawer was open. The papers moved. Your perfume still hangs in the air. How dare you come into my home without asking?" She tutted softly, like a mother correcting a child. "I was only trying to help. I thought perhaps you had misplaced something important. I didn't want you to suffer more stress." The fire inside me roared. "You don't want to ease my suffering. You want to take what isn't yours." Her mask slipped for a heartbeat. I heard the steel in her tone. "You're being dramatic, Clara. If you can't handle this alone, you'll have no choice but to accept help. Don't let pride ruin you." I hung up, my hand trembling, but not with weakness, with fury. My chest heaved, my heart hammering, but beneath the chaos was clarity. She had crossed the line. The pretense of concern was gone. What remained was intrusion, violation. That night I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I sat at James's desk, staring at the papers she had rifled through, and felt the flames in me rise higher. The next blow came from Troy. 2 days later, he appeared at my door, smiling as though nothing had ever happened. He carried a bottle of wine and held it up like a peace offering. "Thought we could share a drink, like old times." Old times? My stomach turned. Old times meant him mocking me, dismissing me, leaving me in tears while he basked in my parents' praise. I stepped aside reluctantly, letting him in, but my guard was ironclad. He poured the wine, talking casually, pretending at brotherly concern. "You know, Clara, I've been thinking, James wouldn't want you to struggle. He'd want you to have guidance. I could take some of the pressure off, make sure the money is invested wisely." I sipped my wine slowly, meeting his eyes over the rim of the glass. "Funny, James never once mentioned you in his plans. Everything he left to me." His smile faltered, but only for a moment. "You don't have to take it that way. He assumed family would step in. He knew you couldn't do it alone." The words struck me like acid, burning as they sank in. That was the story they had built, the story that I was incapable, fragile, incompetent. It was the same lie they had fed me since childhood, now repackaged as justification for theft. I set the glass down carefully, deliberately. "You're wrong. James believed in me more than anyone ever has. He trusted me to handle this because he knew I could, and I will." Troy's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "Don't be stupid, Clara. You'll regret shutting us out." My voice was cold, steady. "I've regretted letting you in my whole life." The silence that followed was thick, electric. For once, he had no reply. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. The door slammed, but I didn't flinch. The fire inside me only burned hotter. By the end of that week, I had stopped waiting for their kindness. I no longer hoped for their love. I knew now, beyond doubt, that it had never existed. And with that knowledge came a strange kind of freedom. They could not break something that was already broken. They could not take love that had never been given. All they could do was try to strip me of James, and that I would never allow. I sat at the desk one evening, pen in hand, journal open. The page glared back at me, waiting. Slowly, I wrote, "They believe I am fragile. They believe I will surrender. But they are wrong. I am not the child they silenced. I am not the sister they mocked. I am not the daughter they dismissed. I am the widow of the only man who ever truly saw me, and I will burn before I let them desecrate his memory." I set the pen down and leaned back, staring at the words. They did not comfort me, but they steadied me. They were no longer thoughts I whispered in the dark. They were declarations, etched in ink, undeniable. The breaking point was near. I could feel it in my bones, in the restless nights, in the fury that simmered beneath every interaction. The silence I had once endured was gone. What remained was fire. And fire does not beg. Fire consumes. The night the storm broke was colder than most. Wind rattled the windows, and the city outside seemed to groan under its weight. I had barely slept for days, my body exhausted but my mind sharpened by anger. The fire inside me had grown too large to be contained. It began with another knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, confident, entitled. I knew even before I opened it that it would be her. My mother stood there, wrapped in her heavy coat, her lips painted in a shade too bright for morning. She brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, the way she always had, as though I were still a child in her house and not a woman on my own. "We need to talk," she said briskly, setting her bag on the table. I shut the door slowly, deliberately, then turned to face her. "Do we?" She ignored the bitterness in my tone. "Yes, this has gone on long enough. You're dragging your feet, Clara. Important matters are waiting. Banks, lawyers, assets, you cannot keep stalling." I folded my arms, leaning against the door. "What you mean is that I'm not handing things over quickly enough for you." Her eyes flashed, but her voice remained syrupy. "I only want what's best for you. You're overwhelmed. It isn't fair for you to carry so much." "Don't," I snapped, the word cutting through the room like a blade. "Don't you dare pretend this is about me. This is about you. It's always been about you." For a moment, the mask slipped. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by a cold, sharp glare. "You're being paranoid." "No," I said quietly, fiercely. "For the first time in my life, I'm not." The silence stretched. The only sound was the wind howling against the glass. She straightened, adjusting her coat as though preparing for battle. "If you refuse to be reasonable, Clara, you'll leave me no choice. We'll take this to court. You'll embarrass yourself. You'll lose." I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign in my own throat. "You underestimate me, Mother. You always have. You think grief makes me weak. But grief has only stripped away what little illusion I had left about you. I see you now, and I will not let you win." Her lips tightened. Without another word, she grabbed her bag and stormed out. The slam of the door echoed through the apartment, but instead of shaking me, it steadied me. I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, and realized something had shifted irrevocably. The breaking point had come, not as a collapse, but as ignition. The next confrontation came with Troy. He arrived 2 days later, barging in without knocking, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell are you doing, Clara? Mom says you're refusing everything. Do you know how stupid you're being? You'll ruin all of us." "All of you," I corrected, my voice calm, measured. "Not me." He threw his hands up. "It's the same thing, we're family." The word snapped something in me. I stepped forward, my voice rising. "No, don't you dare use that word. Family doesn't abandon you at the airport. Family doesn't ignore your pain. Family doesn't scheme behind your back while your husband's body is still warm in the ground. You are not my family. You are my blood, nothing more." Troy's face reddened, his fists clenched. For a moment, I thought he might strike me. But instead, he spat on the floor, muttered a curse, and stormed out like a child denied a toy. When the door slammed, I felt lighter. Each confrontation was stripping me bare, but in that bareness there was strength. I had nothing left to lose with them, and that made me dangerous. The last mask to fall was Lily's. She came quietly, late in the evening, her eyes rimmed red as though she had been crying. She sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. "Clara, I didn't want it to be like this. I swear I didn't." I studied her, saying nothing. She swallowed hard, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mom pressured me. She said if I didn't sign, she'd cut me off completely. I didn't know what to do. Her voice trembled, her body shook, but I had lived long enough in the shadows to know that tears could be weapons too. "And you chose her," I said flatly. She looked at me desperately. "I didn't want to choose against you. I thought maybe if I went along, she'd calm down. You thought wrong." My voice was quiet but unyielding. "You signed. You gave her power she never should have had. You betrayed me, Lily. And you can't take that back." Her sobs filled the room, but they slid off me like rain against stone. I no longer had space for her apologies. She had made her choice, and it had carved a canyon between us. When she finally left, her face blotched and her shoulders hunched, I closed the door behind her and pressed my forehead against the wood. My chest ached, but the fire in me only blazed brighter. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and stared at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes ringed with dark shadows, but behind them burned something fierce. I did not look like the girl who had begged for scraps of affection. I looked like someone forged in fire and sharpened by loss. The silence in the apartment was no longer suffocating. It was expectant, like the pause before a storm unleashes itself. I whispered to the empty room, to James, to myself, "No more silence, no more begging, no more masks. If they want a war, they will have one." The breaking point had come, and I was ready to burn. The night after Lily's tears stained my couch, I could not sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting like restless ghosts. My heart ached, yes, but it no longer ached for their love. That wound had already sealed into a scar. The ache now was for James, for the life we had built together that they wanted to dismantle piece by piece. Grief had stripped away every illusion I once held, the hope that my mother might one day soften. The belief that Troy's cruelty was only immaturity. The faith that Lily, fragile and wavering, might stand beside me. All of it had turned to ash, and ashes tell their own story. They whisper of fire already burned, of illusions already destroyed. I rose from bed before dawn and sat at James's desk. The lamp cast a pale circle of light, and I spread the documents before me like pieces of a puzzle. Bank statements, property deeds, letters from lawyers, notes in James's careful handwriting. They were more than paper, they were weapons. For weeks I had been on the defensive, reacting to their every intrusion, every manipulation. That time was over. If they wanted war, I would not meet them pleading for silence. I would meet them with strategy. The first step was protection. I visited the bank as soon as it opened, tightening security, changing access codes, ensuring no one could touch a cent without my consent. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, looked at me with pity as I signed the forms. He saw only a grieving widow. He did not see the fire in my chest, the vow etched in my bones. The second step was information. They thought themselves clever, careful, but their arrogance betrayed them. My mother slipped when she spoke of the court. Troy had slipped when he insisted James must have assumed the family would take over. Lily had slipped when I caught her whispering into the phone. Each slip was a thread, and I intended to pull until the whole fabric unraveled. I began to record everything. Every call, every visit, every careless word. I wrote it all in my journal, the ink pressing deep into the pages. It felt almost ritualistic, turning their lies into written truth. James had always believed in the power of words. Now I understand why. At night, I sat in the quiet apartment and replayed their voices in my head, dissecting every phrase. You'll embarrass yourself. James wouldn't want you to struggle. If you let me manage some of it. Each line was less about me and more about them, revealing their hunger, their fear, their impatience. The third step was allies. I had none in blood, but perhaps there were others. The lawyer James had trusted, Mr. Alden, was one, older, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for integrity. When I met him, his expression softened as he looked over the papers. Your husband was thorough, he said. He left little room for dispute, but grief can make vultures bold. Stay vigilant. I intend to, I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. Another ally, unexpected, was the neighbor across the hall. Mrs. Garvey, widowed herself for nearly a decade, had seen Troy leaving my apartment in a rage. She knocked on my door later, her wrinkled face lined with concern. Be careful, dear. I've seen families tear each other apart after a death. Don't let them take what's yours. Her words were simple, but they rooted in me. Perhaps not everyone was the enemy. Perhaps not everyone wore masks. Still, trust was dangerous. I learned that too well. My plans had to remain in my hands. One evening, I lit a candle on James's desk and sat before it with my journal. The flame flickered, casting shadows that danced across the room. I whispered aloud as if speaking to him. They think I am weak. They think I will break, but I am not their child anymore. I am not their scapegoat. I am yours, James, and I will protect what you left me with every breath I have. The flame shivered, and I imagined for a moment that he heard me, that he was near. The ache in my chest sharpened, but I did not look away. Ashes of illusions lay around me, but from them something stronger was rising. Strategy, resolve, fire. The counterstrike had begun. The days blurred into each other, but for the first time since James's death, I did not feel powerless. My grief was still there, an ocean beneath my feet, but I had learned to stand on its waves instead of drowning in them. Every morning I woke with a sharper purpose. Every night I slept with a plan carved deeper into my mind. I began to trace their movements. Troy's arrogance made him careless. He bragged to friends in bars, loud enough for others to hear, about money coming in soon. My mother cloaked her greed in charity luncheons, mentioning to acquaintances how Clara is struggling and someone responsible should step in. Lily's guilt surfaced in her trembling hands, her eyes that refused to meet mine. They thought they were subtle, but they left trails everywhere. I gathered those trails, quietly, patiently. In the evenings, I sorted documents into piles, labeling them meticulously. Assets, correspondence, legal loopholes. Each page was a stone in the fortress I was building around James's legacy. I whispered to myself as I worked, they will not take this. They will not take him from me. The more I prepared, the colder my mind became. I no longer flinched at their words or cowered beneath their threats. Instead, I studied them like a chessboard, each piece with its own weakness. My mother, pride, Troy, temper, Lily, guilt, and me, I was no longer the pawn, I was the player. One night, as the wind clawed at the windows, I laid out James's journals again. He had been precise, almost obsessive about details. Dates, names, figures, all neatly recorded. My throat tightened as I traced his handwriting, but alongside the grief came strength. His care, his foresight, had left me the map I needed. I copied passages into my own notes, marking connections, highlighting inconsistencies in what my family claimed. Piece by piece, their story unraveled. They had told me James's assets were complicated, fragile, but his journals showed otherwise. He had secured them carefully, ensuring they would pass directly to me. They had insisted he never could have predicted this. But he had written of his fears, his desire to protect me from those who might circle like vultures. Reading those words was like hearing his voice again. He had known, he had trusted me to fight, and so I would. The counterstrike required more than documents. It required readiness to face them when the masks were gone entirely. I practiced words aloud in the empty apartment, my voice echoing off the walls. You will not take this from me. James chose me, not you. I am not afraid of you anymore. Each time I spoke, my voice steadied. Each time, the fire grew. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. When the weight of their betrayal pressed so hard that I curled into myself and wept. But even then, the tears no longer dissolved me. They washed me clean, leaving the fire burning brighter in their wake. Mrs. Garvey knocked one evening, holding out a small tin of cookies. You've been working too hard, she said softly. Her kindness caught me off guard. I had forgotten what uncalculated care felt like. I accepted the tin with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I ate one cookie at James's desk and cried. Not because of betrayal, but because someone had given without expecting to take. It reminded me that not all the world wore masks. Some faces were real. When the tears passed, I wiped my eyes and wrote in my journal, even ashes can shelter sparks. Even in ruin, fire can grow again. The next morning, I stood at the mirror, my reflection pale but resolute. The woman staring back at me was no longer the Clara who had begged for love in her mother's kitchen, no longer the sister who had defended Lily only to be betrayed, no longer the widow collapsed on the airport floor. She was something else now, something forged in fire, honed by grief, sharpened by betrayal. My illusions were gone. All that remained was resolved. And from those ashes, my counterstrike would rise. The world had always told me grief was weakness. They wanted the widow broken, the daughter compliant, the sister quiet. They mistook tears for fragility, silence for surrender. What they never understood was that grief in its rawest form could become something sharper than steel. I had been sharpening mine for weeks. The first strike had to be precise. Rage was loud, grief was messy, but strategy was clean. And if there was one thing James had taught me, it was that strategy always wins. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday afternoon when my mother summoned me to her house. The tone of her voice left no room for refusal. She wanted me there, and she expected obedience. Once I would have trembled, already rehearsing apologies in my head before I stepped through her door. But Clara was gone. I arrived in a black coat, my hair pulled back, my face pale but unflinching. When she opened the door, I saw the faint flicker in her eyes, the recognition that something in me had shifted. She ushered me inside, where Troy and Lily were already waiting. The living room was immaculate, polished to a sterile shine. The air smelled of expensive candles, a mask for the rot beneath. They sat like actors awaiting their cue. "Clara," my mother began smoothly, "we've been patient, but we cannot wait any longer. It's time decisions were made." I took the armchair opposite them, folding my hands in my lap. "Decisions about what?" Troy leaned forward, his eyes glittering with impatience. "About the estate. About the money, about the properties. You can't hold it all yourself. It's irresponsible. Irresponsible." The word echoed in my skull, dripping with irony. I had been the only one responsible when James died, when the weight of the world crushed me in silence. And now they dared accuse me of recklessness. I kept my voice calm. "Everything James left was in my name. There is nothing to divide." Lily flinched at the firmness of my tone, but my mother's face hardened. "Don't be naive. Legalities can be challenged. You'll lose in court if you don't compromise. Better to settle this within the family than embarrass yourself publicly." There it was, the threat she had dangled before. Only now she thought it would frighten me into surrender, but I had prepared. I reached into my bag and placed a small recorder on the table. Its red light blinked steadily. Their eyes widened. "I've been recording our conversations," I said softly. "Every call, every visit, every word. Including your threats to take me to court, to strip me of what James left me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Troy's face darkened with rage, Lily's lips parted in shock, and my mother's eyes narrowed like a predator cornered. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. I leaned forward, my voice steady, my grief sharpened into a blade. "You think grief has made me fragile. You think I am still the child you could silence. But grief has made me dangerous, and I dare everything now." The recorder blinked in the heavy quiet. Their masks faltered. I saw fear, small but present in their eyes. That was the first strike. Not a scream, not a breakdown, but a reminder that I was no longer theirs to control. I stood, gathering my coat around me. "If you want to take me to court, go ahead. I'll bring every recording, every note from James, every witness. I'll let the world see who you are." Troy rose halfway from his seat, fists clenched, but my mother shot him a warning glance. She knew better than to lunge at me now. I turned to leave. My hand was already on the door when Lily's voice cracked through the silence. "Clara, please," I froze but didn't turn. Her words trembled with guilt, but I had no use for guilt anymore. "You made your choice, Lily," I said quietly. "Now live with it." And then I walked out. The cold air outside hit me like a baptism, stinging, cleansing. My heart pounded, my hands shook, but not from fear, from release. For the first time, I had faced them without bending, without breaking. It wasn't the end. It was only the beginning, but beginnings mattered. That night I sat at James's desk, lighting a single candle. The flame flickered and I whispered to him, "I struck first today, I think you'd be proud." The candle's flame swayed as if in answer. My chest ached, but beneath the ache was strength. The first strike had been made. The war had truly begun. The silence after my first strike did not last long. Like wounded animals, they regrouped quickly, snapping and clawing, but the wound was there, bleeding beneath their pride. I saw it in my mother's eyes when she called 2 nights later, her voice sharp, stripped of its practiced sweetness. "You think this little game makes you strong?" she hissed. "You'll regret humiliating us." I let her words wash over me. They were meant to sting, but instead, they confirmed what I already knew. The mask was cracking. I answered calmly, "Humiliation is the truth, finally speaking aloud. If that hurts you, perhaps you should look at what you've done." She slammed the phone down. That sound, her silence forced by my refusal to yield, was sweeter than any apology she could ever give. Troy was less subtle. He cornered me outside the apartment a day later, fury twisting his face. "You're destroying this family, Clara. You're nothing without us." I looked him in the eye and felt no fear. "I've been nothing because of you. Without you, I can finally be something." He lunged forward as if to strike me, but froze when he noticed the small black device in my hand. Another recorder. Another blinking red light. He cursed it under his breath and stormed off, but I knew I had struck again. Rage made him sloppy. Sloppiness made him vulnerable. Even Lily, whose tears once tugged at me, revealed herself in those days. She came trembling, whispering that she still wanted to make things right. But her eyes betrayed her, shifting, uncertain, still bound to my mother's leash. "You can't serve 2 masters," I told her quietly. "You already chose." Her tears fell harder, but they no longer moved me. I turned my back before she could beg. Alone in the apartment that night, I lit another candle and sat before James's desk. The flame flickered against the recordings, the journals, the documents, my arsenal. I whispered into the shadows, "They think grief is a weakness. But you knew, didn't you, James? You knew it could be a weapon." The fire reflected in my eyes, steady and sharp. I had made the first strike. The fractures were spreading through them like cracks in glass. Soon, all it would take was one more blow to shatter them completely. Families do not shatter all at once. They crack first, invisible lines spreading beneath the surface, until the pressure becomes too great and the pieces splinter apart. By the time my mother called another meeting, those cracks were already yawning into chasms. This time, the 3 of them could not even sit together without snapping. Troy barked at Lily the moment I entered the room, accusing her of being careless with words. My mother silenced him sharply, but the venom in her voice was unmistakable. They no longer trusted each other. I sat in the corner, silent, watching. It was almost beautiful, in a cruel way, years of their own arrogance turning inward, corroding the fragile unity they pretended to have. My mother tried to regain control, her voice cold and commanding. "We must present a united front. If Clara takes us to court, division will destroy us," Troy sneered. "Division? She's already destroying us, and you let her. You always protect Lily, but she's the one who ruined everything with her weakness." Lily gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "I only did what you both told me. I didn't want this." Their voices rose, clashing, overlapping, until it was no longer a conversation but a storm. I sat still, almost serene, and let the storm rage. Finally, when they paused for breath, I spoke. "You don't need me to destroy you, you're doing it yourselves." They turned toward me, their faces flushed, but I didn't flinch. James left me everything because he saw what you truly are, and now the world will see it too. The fractures are already there. Soon, nothing will be left to hold you together." The silence that followed was heavy. For once, no one argued. Even my mother's eyes flickered with something that looked dangerously close to fear. I rose to leave, my steps slow, deliberate. Behind me, their voices erupted again, but this time it was not aimed at me. It was turned inward, knives against each other. The fracture had become visible. And fractures, once seen, cannot be undone. That night, back in the dim glow of my apartment, I wrote in my journal, "They are breaking without my hand. All I must do now is give the final push." Traps are not built in haste. They are patient, silent structures, waiting for pride to step inside. My family's pride was so blinding they never saw mine being woven right in front of them. I started with Troy. He was the easiest. Rage made him reckless, and recklessness made him talk. I invited him to meet at a cafe near the courthouse, pretending I wanted peace. He arrived already scowling, his voice too loud, his words dripping with threats. "You'll regret this, Clara," he growled. "You can't fight us all. Mom has friends in high places, will strip you of everything." The recorder in my purse blinked red. Every word fell neatly into its memory. I nodded politely, offering no resistance, letting him boast deeper into the noose. Next was Lily. I sent her a letter, handwritten, trembling with sorrow. I wrote of James, of loneliness, of wanting only one sister left beside me. The bait was irresistible. She came to me sobbing, confessing everything, how she had signed, how she had lied, how mother had forced her. She begged for forgiveness, never realizing I was writing down every word. My mother was last, the most dangerous. I knew she would never admit her schemes openly, but she adored her reputation, the mask of elegance and morality she wore in public. So I was struck by that. I invited her to a charity event James once supported, and when she arrived, I introduced her loudly as the woman threatening to take a widow to court. The gasps from the room were enough. Her smile faltered, her hands trembled, and though she tried to recover, the whispers followed her everywhere that night. 3 traps, 3 different snares, rage, guilt, pride. They walked willingly into each one. When I returned home, I placed the recorder, the notes, and the memories side by side on James's desk. My arsenal was complete. I whispered into the flickering candlelight, "The next move will not be theirs, it will be mine." The trap was set, and soon it would close. Masks can only hold so long before the cracks beneath them show. My family had worn theirs for years, masks of respectability, of unity, of care. But when the pressure came, they shattered one by one. It began in court. They thought I would cower, that the presence of lawyers and strangers would break me. Instead, I walked in dressed in black, James's wedding band still on my hand, a silent emblem of what I had lost. My grief, once their weapon against me, became my shield. Troy was the first to stumble. His anger betrayed him under questioning, his voice rising until the judge silenced him with a sharp gavel strike. The recordings I had gathered played back his threats, each word echoing in the chamber like a confession. His mask of control slipped, leaving only rage and shame. Then Lily, trembling, broken under her own guilt. When asked about the documents she signed, her voice cracked, confessing that she had been pressured, that she had not even fully understood what she was signing. My mother's glare cut across the courtroom, but Lily could not hold it. Her mask was gone, replaced by tears and apologies no one believed. At last, my mother. She tried to hold herself together, speaking with that polished charm she had perfected over decades. But the whispers from the charity event still followed her, and my words, my careful records of her threats, burned through her facade. I watched as her mask cracked piece by piece until even she could not hide the fury underneath. By the end, the courtroom was silent. Their lies lay bare, their dignity stripped. I did not celebrate, not outwardly. But inside, something long frozen began to thaw. I walked out into the pale afternoon light, their voices still echoing behind me. I knew this was not the end. But their masks were gone, and once a mask is shattered, it can never be worn again. Victory in court should have been enough, but reckoning is not measured by laws alone. Justice, for me, meant looking them in the eyes and leaving nothing unspoken. I invited them to the house one last time. The same living room where they had once plotted against me now stood as a battlefield stripped of pretense. No lawyers, no judges, no neighbors, only us, the ruins of a family. My mother sat stiffly, her lips thin, pride clinging to her like a dying flame. Troy paced like a caged beast, fists clenching. Lily sat curled into herself, eyes red, whispering apologies to no one in particular. I remained standing. Grief pressed against my chest, but it was not weakness anymore. It was the voice that guided me. "You tried to break me," I began quietly, but all you did was strip me down to the truth. And the truth is this: you were never family. Not to me. Not to James, Troy snarled. You think you've won? You're alone, Clara. You'll always be alone. I met his eyes. Alone, yes, but free, that is something you will never know. Lily whimpered. Clara, please. I shook my head. You had a choice. You chose them. Now live with the shadow of that choice. Finally, I turned to my mother. For a moment, I saw her as she once was, towering, untouchable, the woman whose approval I had begged for all my life. But now she looked small, diminished, stripped of the mask that had once made her invincible. I spent years longing for your love, I told her. I don't anymore. I don't need you, and that is what breaks you most. Her face twisted, but she said nothing. I left them in silence. Their empire of control lay in ruins, and I had no need to stay among the ashes. As I stepped into the night air, I whispered James's name. This was for him, but it was also, finally, for me. The reckoning was done. The war ended not with triumph, but with silence. Days passed, and I heard nothing from them. No calls, no knocks at the door, no venomous words disguised as family concern. The quiet was almost foreign, like stepping into a house after the fire had burned everything down. Ash still clung to the air, but the flames were gone. I wandered through the apartment, touching the walls James had painted, the chair where he once read, the desk where his careful handwriting still lived in journals. Their shadows no longer reached here. This space was mine, scarred but untaken. Sometimes the loneliness pressed against me so sharply I could hardly breathe. Troy's words haunted me. You'll always be alone. Perhaps he was right, but solitude felt cleaner than their company ever had. Loneliness was not the same as captivity. I lit a candle each night on James's desk. Its flame was smaller than the fury that had carried me, but steadier, gentler. I would sit before it and speak softly into the quiet. I fought for you, I whispered. I fought for us, and I survived. The silence never answered, but in that silence I found peace. Outside, life continued, strangers laughing in cafes, buses hissing down the street, seasons shifting without pause. For the first time, I felt no need to chase it, no need to prove myself within it. Survival itself was enough. One evening, I opened the window. The night air smelled of rain, sharp and clean. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, carrying away the last fragments of their voices. They had wanted me broken. Instead, they had forged me. From grief, from betrayal, from ashes, I had risen into something harder, sharper, unyielding. I would carry James with me always, not as chains of sorrow, but as the fire that had taught me how to fight. The silence after the fire was vast, but it was mine.